Namaste. So, we start this session on pain and suffering. I think this is a subject of universal interest, and it can be approached from many angles. But before we speak about the cure and how to deal with suffering, let us first understand the various kinds of suffering that we as human beings experience. So, there are various levels at which we can experience suffering, and accordingly, we can understand that the different types of suffering. One, of course, which is very, very obvious, which we all experience, is the physical suffering, and various kinds of pain, various kinds of due to diseases, illnesses, and we all know its role in it serves its purpose. It's like it gives us a signal of what is wrong, what is going on within us. It reminds us, it's like a reminder that all is not well and we need to take certain measures. So, to that extent, we can understand that pain is a kind of natural corrective given to us so that we can understand where things are going wrong and we can take an adequate measure towards it. It applies also to psychological suffering because the moment we experience pain, we suffer, whether it be in everyday life, whether it be in workplace, whether it be in a relationship. It is an indication that all is not well and we need to do something about it. So, to that extent, pain and suffering are a reminder from nature. It is like a boon which reminds us of something which is amiss. So, the second kind of suffering we experience is psychological. And here we can have a whole hierarchy, a whole range of kinds of suffering that we experience. We can experience the most primitive form of suffering as where we want something and we don't get it. So there is a gap between what we want and what we have, and also the limitation within our capacity to have it. So there are three aspects of it. One is there is a want. Second is there is a gap between what we want and what we actually have. And third is it's not just a gap in terms of a distance, but also there is a limitation, there is an incapacity in actually having it. So this is a most early form of suffering that we experience. Most human beings go through it. And this is the kind of suffering which Buddha refers to as the suffering born of desire. So it is this desire to find something greater than ourselves which we don't have. Now, very often the remedy suggested for this kind of suffering is to come out of desire. But it's like it almost annuls, it's like cutting the knot. But if you really go to the root of desire, we will understand that basically desire is one of the ways that we want to expand, grow, increase. Desire is a means by which we want to increase upon anything. Now, if we have the right way of knowing how to increase, how to expand, then probably we can come out of these inferior modes and find the true way towards fulfillment. Through desire, basically, we are seeking delight, we are seeking fulfillment. But desire is a response in ignorance. We think that by this particular object we can feel the sense of fulfillment. But after many such havings, gettings, and losings, we begin to realize that it's not objects, it's not this which is going to really make me fulfill, but there is something else, and that something keeps eluding us. So often I use this story that, about desire and how it leads to a kind of learning curve, and how even desires become ingrained like a conditioning. It's not that all desires are not even real desires, they are fabricated inside because we are seeing everybody run after something. So the story is of a person who makes a visit to a place where people are depressed, and they see a man who is crying out constantly, Usha, Usha. I hope there is no Usha in this group. So he is crying out, Usha, Usha. But Usha is good because Usha is light. So he is crying out, Usha, Usha, Usha. And they ask, why are you constantly taking the name of Usha? So he says, I am very unhappy. Why? Because he says, I loved Usha and I couldn't get married to Usha. So he says, yes, it happens. Life is like that. We don't always get to know. As they say, that famous thing, कि कहीं ज़मीं तो कहीं आसमान नहीं मिलता. So he goes to another few beds and there is another person crying out for Usha. So he asked, is this another Usha? He says, no, it's the same Usha. So what is the problem with this Usha? He says, well, he got married to the Usha. That he couldn't and he is unhappy. Okay? That also happens in life. We think that we are going to be happy getting something and we realize that it is not this that we were actually wanting. And this happens because of a very interesting psychological phenomena, since we are at it, that in a relationship or in an object, our mind, which is constantly desiring things, imaging things, we live in a world of images, by the way. So we project these images onto the person or a thing, and we start believing for a while, it's a game of nature, that this is it. But actually, it's our own projection. People do it all the time. They do it even with God. They have this idea God is all loving, all benevolent. And it works very well till, all your mannats are getting pura. But the day we ask for something and it doesn't work out, that's when we begin to question. But actually, that's when we grow up. So it's a greater grace when God doesn't grant us something which we were desiring. But we have this conception that, God will grant whatever I ask for. Now imagine how uncomfortable God would be that 1 lakh people appearing for an exam are all praying to Him. At least 50,000 are praying, but seats are only 500. So obviously if He grants to everyone, there will be chaos. But nevertheless, these conceptions that we have about life, this image that we play with images. And this is a big problem in relationship, by the way, because we have already thrown or projected that image onto human beings, onto God, onto everything, onto life itself. And when that image is broken, then we get disappointed. But frankly, when an image is broken, it's time to get real. But, that takes a long journey. So then he goes, the story continues, and he goes a few beds away, and there is another man crying out, Usha, Usha. So he says, now what happened to this man? So he says, well, he doesn't know who Usha is. So why is he crying? He is seeing the other two cry, and he believes Usha is someone very desirable. Now you see, a lot of it is nothing but a conditioned response that, if I get this, so it's like a big formation. When we are born, we are born in a state which spirituality is called in a state of ignorance, and all our training, education, parents, unfortunately, teachers, we all condition us to believe that if I get this, I will be happy. Now, the result is that we lose our natural state of happiness. You see, when you see children don't need too many things to be happy. All that they need is, and it's very interesting, what do children need? The first form of happiness that children have. And I'm sure, all of us are psychologists, so we understand the famous experiments by, famous psychologists, that what children need, the first thing that they need just contact comfort. They're happy if they just have their mama and their mama's contact. This is what children are seeking for. And if you deprive them of that and give everything else, there is a kind of scarring which takes place almost for the rest of the life. Even animals, they seek contact comfort. So all our life, we are seeking. Now, if you translate this psychological phenomena into the highest sense, what we are really seeking as beings, who is the mother? Mother is the source. That's how, the word used is contact comfort. There is a big mama out there whom, a baby feels comfortable holding. For animals, it's simply because they need touch. They are very sensitive to touch. But we also need, as human beings, voice. We need to see, and we need various kinds of nourishment, nurturing, etc. So there is in us something ingrained that we want to connect to our origin. It's psychologically there. We are as if programmed for that. And all our life we are searching for it. Now when we are little child babies, when we are born in a family, we automatically feel that my physical parents are the one who are going to nurture and nourish me. And they do their best. But man does not live by bread alone, and as we grow, we have other kinds of nurturance and nourishment that we require. And as we go through the journey, if we are not satisfied only with material things, we start looking for those other kinds of nurturing, and the pain and the suffering begins to increase and change its color. So, from desire, it takes another kind of you, this same suffering. It is the yearning for something which is much greater, much higher, much vaster than what my limited existence can even conceive of. So, the difference is desire is something horizontal. I want objects. But deep within, desire is a mistranslation of a longing which wants to climb up towards something much greater, a greater existence. Human beings are programmed to evolve. And when we don't do it, we begin to suffer after a time. This growth is something we are meant to grow at all levels. In children, it takes the tendency of wanting to step into the adult shoes. They don't know that it's not a very good thing to do. I mean, it's not going to make you more happy. But children have this natural tendency. They want to grow up. They feel that if I grow up, I can do all the things that adults can do. Now, when adults grow up and they face the real world, then they want to be, I wish I retire and sit comfortably. Now, when you retire and sit comfortably, you are still looking for something greater. Now, if we look behind all these movements, it is basically that we as human beings have this innate urge to grow. We are programmed to grow. We are programmed to evolve. And the gap between what we are presently and what we can evolve, the possibilities within us, is the deep cause of unease. This is the deep cause of our suffering, but it takes this form that maybe if I have this object, it takes the form of desire and want for small little things, then it takes the form of ambition, then it takes the form of emotional hunger, and we journey through this till finally we discover that it's none of these things, it's not objects, but it is the subject that we are seeking. The subject itself, within us we carry the source of fulfillment, but that comes much later. We have to go through several degrees of illusions, disillusionment. Now, if we ask why this, constantly, why don't we learn in one? We are poor learners, all right, but there is a logic behind it. Now, initially, if we all know that, Sri Aurobindo described beautifully in Savitri the evolution of love. So, what do we initially want? We want good looks, charming personality, something very external. Maybe, the salary in the bank, the job, the NRI status, and all those things. But as we grow, we know that this is not enough. So we begin to feel the need for an emotional connect. Now, we may have an emotional connect, but we cannot share our thoughts. So we begin to seek something else, a deeper, sharing of thought, a companionship, a camaraderie. And then when we go further, we begin to seek a common ideal, a unity in a common ideal towards which we are both aspiring. And this aspiration now goes beyond our limited frame. It's no more just a family, but an ideal, which is still, it becomes beyond the limits of our small little earthly existence. And then we still go further, then it becomes a common aspiration for something greater and beyond. See, it's a very interesting observation we all can make. I have studied communes, I have seen different communes. And it's very strange that the kind of sense of belongingness people feel when they meet somebody with a common aspiration towards a common goal is of a very different quality altogether. You may not know each other. You may not even know sometimes the name, what is the background, everything. But there is a strange connect. And this connect is fortunately without many of the strings that are attached in connections. Unless we, start forming strings and then the problem, we go back to an inferior mode. But essentially, this desire self is a mistranslation in ignorance of something still deeper, and that deeper thing is longing, yearning, and so on and so forth. Then there is another kind of cause or the kind of suffering that we experience, and that is the suffering born not of desire but of ego. Now, what is the suffering of the ego? What is ego actually? It's a construct of nature. But it's so real, so tangible. Now, it's a limited field of personality, limited vibrations of nature, limited movements, a way of life, if you may say, with which we get attached and we think this is me. Now, when I think this is me, there is a natural tendency to shrink away from what is not me. There is, a simple example I may give, that two people living under the same roof and both have very different thoughts, very different kind of constructs in the mind. Now, ego is a construct. and they feel very unhappy. So people have a tendency again to form groups where you have a kind of strengthening of the ego structures. But life is not that, because we have to expand beyond all structures. We have to go beyond all constructs. So this sense of the ego, where there is a holding on to the limited personality, the instinct for survival of this limited personality, one is of the bodily self and the second is of the psychological self, the limited ego personality, is another cause of suffering, because anything that challenges it, anything that pricks a hole into it, a simple thing that two people are discussing and we have our belief systems, and when somebody challenges our belief system, and even if it is very rational and logical, it tends to hurt us, because it's like me. And how can me be, I don't want to see myself vulnerable. So this ego self is the third cause of suffering, which we all experience in life. But deep inside, there is a fourth kind of suffering. All this suffering of the ego self, desired self, and the physical self are sufferings which are born in ignorance. And the cure for them is very simple: grow out of this structure into something which is deeper, truer, real. But there is a kind of suffering which I see these days more and more people experiencing, and that is what can be called as a spiritual suffering. Now, spiritual suffering is born out of two reasons. One is that there is within us a spiritual self, and this needs to actually explore itself. It needs to express. Now, there is a period of growth in which we are not aware of it, and till then, life is well, comfortable within its comfort zone. We are like the bird who is well fed, looked after well. There is the parrot in the cage, and you feed it that mirchi and chana, and the parrot is very happy. Now a day comes when the parrot begins to understand it has wings, and that's where problem starts, because the bird now it has a natural instinct to fly out of the cage and enter into the vastness of the sky. It is challenging, it is frightening, but at the same time it is born for that. Now, as long as it is not aware that it has wings, it is happy with this comfort zone. But the day it becomes aware that it has a greater possibility, and many of us in today's generation, I see many youngsters who come, they are feeling this suffering because they are feeling inwardly stifled. They don't even know that there is something which wants to express itself. It takes a vague form initially of an ideal, and later on it takes a more and more concrete form of going beyond the frame of this, and they know that within this frame I can't get what I am looking for. So it takes various forms, and they are misunderstood. They feel strangeness. One of the kinds of suffering they experience is that they come, they meet people, but they feel very strange. They feel the world as a strange place, because this is a new type of humanity which is emerging. So there is the suffering which is a spiritual suffering. But even when the bird expands, there is a fifth kind of suffering that intervenes, and that is very well explained in this famous story, Jonathan Livingston Seagull. I am sure most of us have read it. So this is the suffering of the bird which flies into the sky and looks down and sees that its own kind are crawling on the ground. They can fly, and it wants them to fly. It knows the joy and the riches and beauty of the flight. But when it comes down, nobody is ready to believe it, because they believe that no, this is enough. I'm fine within my boundaries. And this is another kind of suffering, the suffering of a Buddha. Of course, we use the word suffering, but for want of better term. But it is also a kind of suffering where you engage with your deeper self and enter into a state of freedom. But you want everyone to be free, and this comes because we are not just individuals, but we are also a collective being. Now, the moment we step out of the boundaries of the ego, we realize that this conception of me and mine and this and that goes away. We are one being, one reality, one totality. And there is a natural tendency for everybody else to come up, to rise, to climb, unless we are moved by a very selfish desire towards nirvana, which is of course a very misguided kind of mysticism. So this kind of an expansion of consciousness creates another element to the kind of suffering we experience, where we cannot feel really the fullest joy unless everybody else is uplifted. Now I'll give this example of this last one. we all go and enjoy, let's say we are enjoying a nice a mountain climb. People love to go to nice, beautiful places. Now, do you enjoy when you go alone, or do you enjoy when there are two, three, four? The joy multiplies, isn't it? This tendency to multiply the joy into many is the original impulse of creation. If you really look at now we go to the ultimate original impulse. The impulse to creation is, as we see in the Upanishads, Ekoham Bahushyami, the one wanted to become many. Why? Because there is a multiplication of the delight of one into many. Also, there is the expression of love. There is the joy of union. There is the joy of longing. All these kinds of joy. So, this need to multiply our joy is mistranslated into the ego self as the need to have my own kind, the ego kind. It is again a mistranslation. Just like desire is a mistranslation of the deeper inner longing, so also the need to multiply this freedom, this joy. Now, this joy and freedom of the higher kind, of the spiritual kind, are not the joy and desire of the ego self multiplying its own type of, its own surname or its own religion, its own caste, creed, etc. into many. It's a mistranslation of a deeper reality, that one who is free inwardly has this natural urge, like Buddha, that others be also free. So, at different levels, we see this suffering experienced by human beings. Of course, at the highest level, it becomes compassion. It is not suffering in this sense, but there is a deep compassion, and that's why men like Buddha, Sri Aurobindo, Shri Krishna, many others, great saints and sages, they have leaned down to earth to lift up humanity and take it to its higher level. They didn't need to. They had entered into freedom. But it is a natural impulse and extension, because ultimately you begin to realize the whole earth as a single unity. So why does all this suffering come about? Now, this comes about primarily because we experience life in a limited way because of the sense of finiteness. But deep within, we know that life is not limited, it is infinite. This is a great, very interesting thing. Even if you look at anything in creation, we'll see there is differentiation on the surface, but there is unity behind. And if we enter into the state of unity, many problems will be solved. Take, for instance, simple issue like language. Now, what is the common language of humanity? Now we fight over languages. How did language evolve? It evolved from the state of common experience, the bhava that everybody goes through. We are all one in our divine origin. So similarly, on the surface we have differentiation. The more we live in the surface consciousness, we live in the sense of differentiation. And this differentiation go to absurd level. Differentiation between the color of the skin, black and white, between this and that, between all kinds of things. But the deeper we go, we begin to discover the sense of unity. So this sense of limitation that we experience is directly proportional to the degree of suffering. Now, this limitation, which comes because of our identification with the finite self, is of three main kinds. And one is the limitation of knowledge. We know that when we grow in knowledge, many of the causes of suffering are taken away. Take, for example, people used to suffer from night blindness, the Black Plague of 13th or 14th century. Now, during that time, people were, out of ignorance, they said it's a curse of God. As if God is capable of cursing. He has no other business except cursing. And so it continued. But knowledge expanded and people discovered it because of a very simple thing. And you can cure it. Now, at a very physical level, or people who suffered from night blindness, they discovered it's not a karma. It is simply that, people are suffering from a deficiency. So knowledge is one. As we grow in knowledge, we can take away many causes of suffering. Even at a physical level. If we grow in knowledge, for example, now a lot of people are suffering out of fear of the pandemic and all this is going on. Supposing we developed a kind of knowledge that these cells, our human cells, which are far more evolved than a virus, are actually capable of making the right response. Supposing we grow into this knowledge that all illness, including cancers and all infections, is a habitual conditioning of these cells. But actually our cells are capable of responding to all the various challenges and conquering them. Now, this knowledge itself is literally it, and actually, if we look at even biologically, if we go deeper, 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 we'll discover that basically each cell is totipotent, but differentiation takes place, and so we can go deeper and we can discover more and more knowledge. Now, knowledge, the definition in spiritual terms, knowledge is that which eventually leads to oneness. So, there is vidya and avidya. So, there is a kind of knowledge which is called as ignorance in spiritual parlance because it's limited knowledge. So, it's knowledge of this, that, all separately. But there is another kind of knowledge where we discover the deep one essence of everything. Now, if we discover the deep one essence, it is very curative. It connects us straight to the root. This is very interesting. We have this wonderful hospital here called JIPMER. So, Jawaharlal Institute of Postgraduate Medical Education and Research. So, once I was there signing a memorandum of understanding with the director and other members of Sri Aurobindo Society. And I just casually happened to ask them, do you know that Mother has given a message to JIPMER? And they didn't know that there is a message like that. So they said, what is it? What is it? I said, Mother gave a message, truth cures. It's a very strange message. Truth cures. How does truth cures? Truth cures because, lot of suffering, lot of illness comes because of a falsehood. Now, what is falsehood? This belief that I am a limited creature. And it's so much conditioned. Right from birth, it is like a great gift that we receive. You are this, you are this, you are all this limited being, and it is reinforced through percentage of marks that we get, as if that is a sign of our, who we are. Now, the day we begin to understand, now, what is the key of spiritual practice? See, in spiritual practice, we decondition ourselves. How? We start with the same process by which we had got bound. From childhood, we are made to realize or believe that I am just this little body. I am just this little body. We must take care. So between us and delight, we put so many bars. Now, spiritual practices start in the reverse way. It starts by saying, Soham Asmi, Aham Brahmasmi. I am the divine. There is within me that divine being. And the more we start dwelling upon ourselves with this idea, of course, a bhakta will do it in a different way. He'll say that I am a child of the divine. So, it literally would, in the face of any challenge, whether it be, COVID or whatever vid, I don't know why they have COVID, because vid means knowledge. So, what kind of vid this is, I don't know. But, the essence is that the day we realize, why am I afraid? Two very interesting stories. One is of Swami Vivekananda when he was chased by monkeys and his first impulse was to run. The second was, I have been all the time living this inner consciousness that I am Brahman. How can I be afraid of a monkey? And he turns and looks at the monkey and now it's monkey's turn to run. And Sri Ramakrishna told a very interesting story in this regard of a lion cub which was brought up by the animals. We have this lovely film also. I think it is Jungle Book. It's a very interesting movie. Very fascinating in certain aspects. So now this lion cub is brought up with the sheep because the lioness has died while delivering the cub, and it has grown up. It believes that it is a sheep. It bleeds, it is afraid, it eats grass. Till one day a huge lion attacks the flock and it discovered this cub bleating and pleading. And then this lion says, why are you bleating and pleading? He says, please spare my life. And then he takes him to the little stream and says, look inside who you are. And he looks at his reflection, and then the big lion looks at his reflection and this lion. And Sri Ramakrishna says very beautifully, then the mighty lion tells the little one, now be free, you are the king of jungle, and roar. Now this is a kind of understanding that we are all divine beings having a miniature experience. See, it reverses the whole position. So the difference between, let's say, spiritual psychology, Indian psychology, and the kind of modern approach, I don't want to use the word Western because there are many movements which have started there also, is that what is the basis? Now in Indian psychology, we have the Ashwath tree. The roots are above. So fundamentally we are divine but limited and conditioned by our human apparatus, by a limited mind, limited life, limited body, and but because fundamentally we are that, we can enter into that. The other kind of thing is I am basically a limited being, and all that I talk about divine is nothing else but my mind creating images, coloring, hallucinations, etc. etc. It's a whole reversal of viewpoint. Now, the moment we take it, I'm not going into the whole logical premise. I can logically argue this out, that why the first proposition that we are fundamentally divine is more true, more real, more consistent with irrational thinking. But nevertheless, this is the basic difference. So this is where we have to understand that this finite limitation of knowledge is because that's how we have learned to condition ourselves. We have never learned to enter into the consciousness of vastness, and it's not just theory. Actually, how does our mind operate? The limited finite mind. It operates by observing through the senses. It analyzes the data, infers, reads, has belief in similar systems which have developed along the lines of rational analysis, and then it acts according to that. Now, everyone who has gone beyond the range of the limited human mind knows that there are ways of knowing which are very different. There is inspiration, there is intuition, there is revelation. But what are these things? They are flashes which have been expressed in the life of seers, sages, and saints. And we tend to disregard them because we say, oh, this is an anomaly. But see what happens in nature. Anomalous is the sign of what will become the next normal. Okay, so these flashes of intuition we see in the life of seers are not anomalies. They are the sign, precursors of what human beings are destined to evolve into. That is the direction. They are a promise that we are meant to discover modes of knowing. Just like human beings have discovered modes of knowing that are non-animal. Animal knows through an infra-rational instinct. We know by reason. Plants know not even by instinct, but they have a knowledge required for their own species. Even atoms know by a kind of involved something that what they need to do. So there are ranges of consciousness beyond human, and our journey is not complete till we reclaim those lost portions of infinity. And that's why we suffer, because we inwardly know we are meant to reclaim it. So we are never satisfied in our den. That's why one term which goes very beautifully with human beings is that what were our first types, our great ancestors. I'm not talking of the chimpanzee and the orangutan, but we were called nomads. And even now when you see the primitive form of people, they are nomads. They are going here and there everywhere. And that's why we see many stories with a promised land. So on one side we are nomads, as if we are looking for something. At the same time we have the promised land, some place, some state of consciousness, some domain where we can reclaim, yes, this is what we are. And that's where Mother says that our true domicile is elsewhere. And we have the Bible story where man is described as a fallen being. Fallen from some state where knowledge is spontaneous, delight is spontaneous, so we can reclaim it, and the way to reclaim it is the way of yoga. And this is a whole subject in itself. So we have limitation of knowledge. The second limitation we encounter is not just knowledge. I may have the knowledge, but limitation of power. Can we reclaim an infinity of power? Yes, we can. This is the second teaching. So we have in Indian thought Vedanta, which is about reclaiming knowledge. This is liberative. The moment we reclaim knowledge, then a lot of suffering is eased out because we know it's play of the one. Many people, the experiences of hatred, jealousies, possessiveness, selfishness fall away because we live in that consciousness of one. But we need to also reclaim power, and that's where we see there is Tantra. Tantra is about reclaiming power, which we have lost. But what is the problem between our present state and reclaiming of power? Our natural instruments do not allow it, because our natural instruments are tuned to a very limited amount of energy. So we have all spiritual practices where we have awakening of Kundalini, awakening of chakras, awakening of greater levels of power. So our human system has to be tuned towards getting that kind of power. But because it's not easy, we don't even look in that direction. So how do we want to reclaim power? There are people who will tell you, I have a number of the chief minister on my cell phone. I know the local police gunda. Sorry, I mean the local police wala. I know the henchman. I know this person, that person. It's a very ignorant way of trying to reclaim what we have lost. Whereas actually what we need to and we can reclaim is that we are children of the divine mother, that original power, the supreme transcendent Shakti. Imagine, can there be any fear when we live with that state of consciousness? What will be impossible for a human being who lives with that state of consciousness? Now, this is not just theory. It can be done and has been done or is being done. Only we have to upgrade our system, because that onrush of energy we cannot tolerate. So that's why in spiritual practices we'll see an emphasis on things like peace, equanimity, detachment. Because if we are too involved with this little play, we are not ready to reclaim these lost, There is the famous story of the three men who were rowing a boat whole night. When they woke up in the morning, the boat hadn't moved an inch. So the boatman came and said, "What happened?" He said, "We were tired rowing the boat, but it didn't move an inch." So he said, "But fools, you have kept it tied still to the anchor. You have to take it off." So it's like, you tell someone that there is a beautiful scene out there, come, let us climb. He says, wait, wait, wait. Now, if you remain waiting there, then you will never have that scenery. That's why we have this wonderful saying in the Ishopanishad, Tene tyaktena bhunjita, magrida kasasvidhanam. By renouncing, you would enjoy. So this renunciation is not a very otherworldly, oh, life is very bad, I am so disappointed, let me renounce, take a kamandalu and walk away. No. The renunciation is renunciation of the lesser for a greater delight. The renunciation of the lesser joy for something much greater which awaits us. The renunciation of lesser modes of knowledge for something much greater. So that's why quietening the mind, brain stilling rather than brainstorming, all these processes, so that a deeper consciousness, a greater, a higher consciousness can awaken into us. It's very logical. But if we remain attached to the inferior mode of being, the inferior play, then we will have suffering. There is no way. Then we have to rely on pills and, whatever else. So, basically it's the growth of consciousness. So, there is the limitation of power along with limitation of knowledge. There is another thing which is very limited in us and which we all know. It is the limitation of the delight of existence. You see, this delight which we see running as a sap in whole creation. But in us it has become into dual terms, joy and sorrow. So when people say that, you have to come out of pleasure and pain, joy and sorrow, it sounds very boring. At least some joy we have, doesn't matter. Along with thoda sa sorrow, thodi khushi, thoda gam. We get one joy, we get two sorrow free, we don't mind. So people feel that when we renounce it, we enter into a blankness. No, joy and sorrow are degradations of the original delight. When we experience that delight, when we don't need it, because we have the original stuff. Sri Ramakrishna would say very nicely that, you can't leave sweets which are of an inferior kind unless you taste the real Raskadam or Rajbhog or whatever it is, the real original one. Then you won't feel like eating it. So there is a phase in which we have to leave this inferior play, and there will be a passage, transition, and then we enter into the higher mode of play. In the higher mode of play, we are no more moving within a limited magic circle of nature, which is called ignorance, and living within it, we will get pain, but we have entered into the flight which will take us to expanding horizons of infinity. It's not that immediately we'll touch infinity. We can, but it'll be difficult to live on those heights. But we will start knowing that we are free from this magic fence. So ultimately, in spiritual parlance, if we go to the root of it, why there is pain, it is the badge of ignorance. And why it is there? It is there to remind us that come out of these limits. Experience limitless knowledge, experience limitless power, experience limitless delight, experience limitless love, experience limitless sweetness, limitless freedom. And that is the state that human beings can reclaim. Until we do it, some kind of a suffering or the other will pursue us. So essentially the whole thing is, all suffering is a way to come out of a limited state into a vaster state. Now, what is its pragmatic thing in everyday life? Say in a relationship, people suffer. And if we look at it, they say, okay, there was expectation. Now, this is a word which has started coming. Then they use the word unconditional love. Now, who can do unconditional love unless you go deep within and touch your core? Why do we can't? We all know it, but why is it that love is always tainted with expectation? Because we are not getting what we want from within. The day we get what we want from within, we won't need it from outside. We'll just give. We'll be a giver. We don't need anything. Because we are open to the very source of love. It is only then we can, the word like unconditional love, which is a wonderful word, I agree that love by its nature is unconditional self-giving. But we cannot practice it within the limitations in which we are laboring. The day we step out and connect ourselves with the universal consciousness and beyond it the divine consciousness, we won't need from any human being. We will receive endlessly. In fact, it will be like receiving back will be like, it's okay, we don't need it. You just take it, receive it. Of course, when you receive, there is a double joy. Triple joy, it multiplies. But love as such is not dependent on that. Same with delight. We don't need from anything external. So basically we have to understand pain and suffering as incidents in man's journey. We start from utter unconsciousness. This like a wide summary, then we can take questions. We start from a state of utter unconsciousness where there is no pain, no suffering. It is the state of comfort zone of matter, completely bound. There is no pain, no suffering. Then starts pain and suffering, like a reminder that this is not ultimate. And this pain and suffering takes us step to step to step. We stabilize at one level, then again suffering comes to remind us of the imperfection. So suffering is a reminder of the imperfection and the limitation in which we are presently living. So then we go another step, till we discover that within my consciousness I can enter the limitless. Now when the consciousness enters into the limitless state, infinite power, infinite knowledge, infinite ananda, we are fundamentally free from suffering. But, and there is a but here, but if we take a human body, matter is imperfect, we again enter into that state. Now this is the last part of the divine project. So there have been beings who say, how does it matter? Forget the matter. Matter never matter. So it's like, matter is like a pot. Break it. Go into that vastness. But that's a little bit selfish. It makes God look like a fairly foolish person who didn't know what he's doing when he created this material existence. Now the next part is this suffering comes because of imperfection of matter, and it's possible for this greater consciousness to keep on needing matter, to keep on impressing itself upon it till matter also evolves and matter experiences spontaneously the knowledge, the power and the delight of existence. This is the final leg of the divine project going on upon earth. And this is, when this happens, then only we can have what Sri Aurobindo calls as a divine life upon earth. Because otherwise we'll have a very beautiful consciousness inside. Wonderful. Inwardly free. But we'll still have matter experiencing its limitations, and therefore we'll still be subject to disease. We'll still be subject to at least some kind of a physical suffering, even though we can be above it. And we'll still be subject to death. But when matter itself will be divinized, then the whole thing becomes wonderful. Can it be divinized? Well, obviously, this is what we are seeing happening. Every evolution is a two-step process, or rather a three-step. The challenge coming from outside, this challenge leads to a state of suffering and pain. And I have given several examples in several of the talks. One of them which I love is the mudfish example, which is a very peculiar creature. Neither comfortable in the water nor comfortable on the land, much like many of us. No? We are entering into a state of new normalcy. Within our group, people say, very good, we are our own normal. But talk to conventional people, they are all, little bit loonies. So, this is a state of abnormalcy because we are to discover a new normalcy. So, we are like the mudfish, caught up between this and that. So, this is the first step. Then the next is we make an effort to discover the new normal. And this new normal we discover first inside. This mudfish discovers it can breathe for few moments this air in this vast world. So that's why mudfish wants to live in that water where its, gills will begin to change into some kind of lungs. So it takes its enjoys, it jumps out and, so nice, but it cannot endure. So it plunges back. So we are like that mudfish. For some moments when we sit in meditation, oh, it was so good, so beautiful. As we step out, somebody tells us that, this is what has happened. Your credit card is blocked, and suddenly, the mudfish goes back into the water. And there is again the pain and suffering which starts. Now, this is the story. But the third step, which we see the entire evolutionary history, this mudfish doesn't give up the effort. It jumps, comes back, till one day it begins to live as an amphibia on land and water equally comfortable. And one day this creature which is on land and water can fly, can soar into the sky. So this is the journey. Whole earth is an evidence of this, that, this is the evolutionary journey. Until we undertake it fully, we'll go through some kind of a suffering or pain. It's an evolutionary pressure. It's meant to help us go. We start from absence of suffering and pain because of unconsciousness. We will reach into a state where there will be no more suffering and pain because of super consciousness. So let me close with some of these lines from Savitri before we take questions. It's one of my favorite lines on page 632. Yes. Page 632 from Savitri. Or rather, I'll turn to page 631, where Sri Aurobindo speaks about the hidden blesses which is at the root of things. And it leads to the seeking after joy, and since it is imperfect, there is pain as a backlash to remind us that this is not yet perfect. But not forever endures this danger game, beyond the earth, but meant for delivered earth. Wisdom and joy prepare the perfect crown. Truth, superhuman, calls to thinking man. At last the soul turns to eternal things. In every shrine it cries for the clasp of God. The shrine is not outside. Every body is the shrine of the divine. So everything that we meet, body is not just human body. It seeks the clasp of the divine. This was the aim. This the supernal law, nature's allotted task when beauty drenched in dim mist waters of inconscient sleep. Out of the void this grand creation rose. For this the spirit came into the abyss and charged with its power matter's unknowing force. In night's bare session to cathedral light, in death's realm repatriate immortality. A mystic slow transfiguration works. All our earth starts from mud and ends in sky. And love that was once an animal's desire, then a sweet madness in the rapturous heart, an ardent comradeship in the happy mind, becomes a wide spiritual yearning space. A lonely soul passions for the alone. The heart that loved man thrills to the love of God. A body is his chamber and his shrine. Then is our being rescued from separateness. All is itself, all is new felt in God. A lover leaning from his cloister's door gathers the whole world into his single breast. Then shall the business fail of night and death, when unity is won, when strife is lost, and all is known and all is clasped by love. Who would turn back to ignorance and pain? So this is the whole journey of man. And we should remember that when pain comes, we have this tendency of saying when there is no pain, everything is granted. We say, God, thank you. We should learn that when all the doors are closing, it is a greater thank you because it means He's opening an inner door. But we are looking at the closed doors and not looking at the door which is opening. So this is where many of us probably are counselors and psychologists, and it is our role to remind that there is an inner door. Don't forget that. And let me close with this story of King Parikshit about this inner door. He is told that within a week you are going to die. It is prophesied. And he doesn't know what to do. So he calls 911, the ambulance, doc. He's a king after all, no? So all the doctors, everybody beck and call. Soothsayers, cephalogists, palmists. They all say, sir, see, destiny we cannot. Destiny is destiny after all. And then he turns to a wise sage and he says, Parikshit, what is your problem? He says, I'm going to die. He says, no, death is not the problem. What is your problem? He says, I'm terribly afraid of death. He says, that is the problem. Your fear is the problem. What if you knew that death means nothing? He says, yes, maybe if I know what death is, I will be free from death. But how do I know? I have never died. So the sage says, I have died. Died to the ego and discovered what is beyond that. And that's how the story of Bhagavat is born. That while we are living in the realm of death, we can discover the immortal, the eternal, and the infinite. And if we can do that, all fear, all limitation, all suffering, all pain, everything vanishes. Even within a trice, one simple exercise with which I can live. Whenever we feel this deep pain inside, see, this is a long journey, finding the soul, entering into it. It's very good to listen as a, larger landscape, and we should undertake it some point of time. What do I do immediately? I'm caught up in my hassle. What we should do immediately is just widen by conceiving the boundlessness of space. This we can try any day. Imagine, the boundlessness of space, billions of light years away, Orion, Lyra, sailing into the infinite sky, just for a moment. Boundlessness of space. And contemplate the endlessness of time. That we have lived millions of years behind. Ages humanity has passed. It's gone through many evolutionary curves, ups, downs, massacres, coming back again, empires, and it has years, decades, centuries ahead to complete that curve. Now, when we contemplate the boundlessness of space and the endlessness of time, you will see that this whole journey of life is nothing but fraction of a moment. And while we are engaged with the fraction of a moment, let us remember the journey that we are yet to take and move towards it through giant leaps and godlike steps. Thank you. Yes, so I can't hear anything. I'm deaf and dumb. So some questions, I think if you message, I'll take it up that way because that's the easier way.
You explained three kinds of suffering. Can you elaborate on the third one?
So 3 kinds of suffering, and I'm glad this has been brought out because there is a kind of cause of suffering which I didn't touch upon because it comes in a different domain. So we have the physical suffering which we all understand, and we have the psychological suffering which is desire and ego self which creates psychological suffering. Let me explain one more before I come to the third one. So the 2.5 one. And behind this little world which we experience, there is a network of forces. I have touched upon it, but purely from a psychological angle, not from an occult angle. And they impinge upon us, make us do things which later on we repent, that why did I do it? Like the great king Dashrath who gave that boon to his wife, that ask me whenever, whatever. And she said, okay, I'll ask you at my own time. And that led to so much needless suffering. So there are forces, cosmic agencies, which yogis are aware of, which act from behind and push us to actions. We think it is my action, my feeling, my wish, and we say, oh, I want to do and be whatever I want to, but not realizing this want and wish is driven by forces of which we have no idea. And there are very huge cosmic forces, even without any reason. I see it every time in my clinic. Every time means not every day I'm encountering it, but abnormal states of depression for no reason at all. There is nothing outward, but people go into states where they have spells of crying, and it's what is called in yoga as the attack by the hostile forces. They don't want us to let free from their net. And they will weave a web of thoughts and suggestions. They'll make us feel helpless, hopeless. They will snatch the will and faith and eventually take us on the brink of despair, abyss, and eventually lead us to suicide. But this is not what I was speaking of when I spoke of the third kind. But since I have this moment, so I am using it. Third kind is the spiritual suffering. And it is of two kinds. One is there is within us the urge for infinity, something within us. Unlike the animal is happy within its circle of its den. Even a lion doesn't want to venture into the city. It's very interesting. It's so powerful, the lion, the elephant, but they don't decide. Because nature has, they're called as Asanna Mrityu. The deity within, which comes from infinite, is still sleeping inside. But in human beings, this inner something, this divine spark begins to become awake. So deep within there is in us a seeking for infinity. Now till a point of time when it is still half asleep, cradled, this little baby is cradled inside what is called as the soul within man, till then we are happy seeking outward things. But when this soul begins to become aware, this little baby says, but this is my home, I am the king. That's when there is a feeling of stifling inside. We are driven by dreams which are very unusual. We seek things upon earth. We seek perfect love. We seek perfect joy. We seek perfect truth. Because this deity carries within itself the imprint from the future. It carries within itself the touch of the origin. So it dreams of those things. You can't help it. It's the sign that a human being is inwardly getting awake. But there are people who don't have this. They are very satisfied and comfortable with roti, kapda, makan. But the day this inner self begins to become awake, the spiritual self, call it the psychic being, the soul, it doesn't matter. Words are really not important. But man carries within himself something which is intrinsically imprinted with the divine essence. And that divine essence, when it begins to grow, it naturally seeks divine in everything. That's what we are reading. It seeks the clasp of God. So it starts with this idea that in world everything is divine. But every time it is hit by its opposite. And it itself cannot know. Where will it find it? But there is in it a seeking. So it feels stifled. And this is another kind of suffering, which I have used the word spiritual suffering. It's because of the stifling of the inmost being of the soul in man. In fact, it can lead to tremendous suffering. And the Gita goes on to say, Swadharmo nidhanam shreya pardharmo bhyava. There is a mode of expression that this soul is born with. But this original file is corrupted. We are driven into actions, works which are not meant for our real growth, the demand of the soul. And therefore we suffer, even though outwardly we succeed. Any number of people I see who have got everything that they wanted in life, but they are unhappy. Because they are not following the original script of life which is hidden right in the heart. So the measure of our unhappiness is the sign, it's a barometer, how much we have deviated from this true truth of our being. So this is one kind of spiritual suffering. And this is another when we have discovered the soul is freed from ignorance, but it sees its fellow souls trapped, who doesn't even want to come out. And the only example I can give is that imagine that you love someone very much. Mother loves a child. But the child takes on to wayward ways. It takes on to drugs, takes on to alcohol, things which will make it suffer. And the mother knows that this path is going to hurt him more and more. But the child is not ready, not willing to listen. And the mother suffers. Why does she suffer? She suffers more than the child, by the way. Strangely, paradoxically, she suffers because she is now no more herself but extended into the child. Something similar is spiritual being experiences when he is awakened, when he is out of the shell of the ego. There is a natural tendency to want this whole world to awaken to the beauty of the future. It is like somebody who has discovered a diamond and wants the world to see it. Says that all your poverty can be eased out. It can be cured. We are suffering from an incurable littleness, but nobody is ready to listen or willing to listen. Of course, times are changing now, but that is another kind of suffering that a spiritual being experiences. So, this last suffering, the spiritual suffering, is of two kinds. One is the deliverance of our own individual spiritual self from the prison of the ego. And the second is it is delivered, but now it suffers because it wants the deliverance of the collective self. And this is that's why it is the term used in Indian thought is Nar and Narayana. So the Narayana is the indwelling universal within Nar. So first, by delivering this self from within, the true Purusha, Nar has many meanings. It is also used in the form of water, but I have very simple take on this. Nara, the Purusha, all of us have within us the true self, which is like that, and all the rest is nature, Prakriti. When we discover it, we truly become worthy of being called a human being. That's a great deliverance. But how can we be happy only with this individual deliverance? We would want everyone to share this happiness. Savitri says it very beautifully. Imperfect is the joy not shared by all. So, this tendency to extend this delight into the collectivity and the resistance we face because matter is imperfect, because human beings are not ready, all this leads to another kind of level of suffering which someone like Buddha and many of the great masters, Sri Aurobindo, and all of them experienced. But that more than suffering, it is like compassion which leans into, which even enters into this dungeon again to liberate. And it suffers because of that. So, this is the first question. Another one?
Can you share the aspect of attachment in suffering?
Yes, attachment is a mistranslation of love. So, attachment is of the ego. Attachment is when we love for the sake of our own self. And I use this example for the sake of our own ego. I use this example when, somebody we love dies again, because there is nothing like death from the deeper angle, but departs. What is in it us that suffers? If you really look at the person, he is on his journey, he has forgotten. Either which way we see. If we don't believe in a soul, there is no need why we should suffer, because dust unto dust. If we believe in a soul, we take it that it's an onward journey. He is not going to suffer. He is freed from this cage. We suffer who are left behind. Why do we suffer? Because we are attached. Attached to what? To a limited personality which we mistook for the person. So attachment is an ignorant way of recreating unity. It is, when people are attached, they are attached to a personality and outward. That's why very often, I ask this question when people say that, I am in love. So I ask them, what are you in love with? Then the person narrates qualities and this and that. This is a little tricky thing, because qualities may change, appearances are bound to change. But true love starts as a very formless essence. The day you say, I really don't know, but I feel something deep within me stirring, you may be bang on the target. Because that's how it's a universal energy, force, power which is moving us. But the mind thinks that it is this body, this form, this personality. That is attachment. Attachment is a movement of ignorance which is taken by this great energy of love, and this ignorant movement is bind itself to a very limited formation, and also it loves that ignorant formation because it gives it joy. But true love is something very different. So, cure for attachment is not detachment. Detachment can be a phase, but cure for attachment is true love. And true love means setting the soul free. Never rule anybody's thought or try to control somebody. If we are trying to do that, it is not love. By its nature, love sets the person free and yet stands, supports. In the best part is always there. Very difficult, but we are born to do difficult things. Why should we do easy things? So this is about attachment and love. Attachment is a mistranslation in ignorance. Yeah.
You talked about habitual conditions of the cells. Is menstruation a habit in the body and all the pain it causes to the body and then other parts of the being? Can there be an end to this?
Yes, very interesting question. Is menstruation a habitual conditioning? Yes, it's very interesting. See, why does menstruation come? Because nature wants to, it has programmed. You see, all the tendencies in human beings programmed to conceive. So there will be, because nature wants to prolong its inferior game, so there will be sexual desire almost around the time when there is conception possible. You know, most of the women will feel the urge around mid-term. And then they accumulate iron, because supposing the conception takes place, you will need immediately to multiply hemoglobin. But supposing it doesn't take place, then the body tends to throw out. So this is the way it operates in nature. Now, there is a very interesting change taking place. When will it cease in women? Before that, let me come to men. This need for maternity, having a child, is actually again a mistranslation of something else. It's this need to extend into another being. This physically, this need to, hold on to something which is very external. Now, there are more and more people I know in modern age who do not want children. Very consciously, they don't want children. There are some very rare couples who are looking beyond merely marriage for having a child or having sex. So the day human beings experience the joy of union without these things, without entering into the purely animal mode of, pleasure or whatever, to have a child, slowly this will go away. But there will be a phase when this impulse is going to die in human beings, but human beings want to get over it, but it is still there, and it takes the form of extreme pain. Because it's a dying impulse. It's like something which is writhing to go away. Now, it's very interesting, even in men it is taking place. If you see the world over, it is interesting that on one side, 100 years back, if you see, human beings were like almost, there was a free sex movement, not 100 years, maybe 60, 70 years back. So people were very worried. What will happen if there is free sex? Now what has happened is, now we see that there is a recoil of nature. There is an increased cases of impotence. It is coming up. Because nature will begin to dwindle that impulse. So the day this sexual energy, which is engaged in a purely animal way, I use this term which in one of my talks in All India Institute, I had said that the energy which we use for procreation and recreation changes into the energy for new creation. This will cease. The pain will cease. A point of time will come when even the cycles will cease. Even if it continues, the pain will cease. The cycles will dwindle. There will be very little loss, because this urge for procreation and recreation goes away. Because this energy has become what is called in spiritual languages urdharvaretas. That seed is turning upward. So in human beings also, the union, even at a physical level, modes will be found without actually engaging into the kind of sexual indulgence which becomes very animal-like. It will be another way where two beings don't have to physically, actually have this whole physical act, but at a very different level, they can fuse together and give birth to a new energy, a new consciousness, which is what is the true offspring. This what we see, this is a great secret which we see in Shiv Purana and some of these ancient tantric literature. Of course, humanity on the whole is very far away from this, so we are talking of something, maybe 100 years ahead or 200 years ahead. But this is the future. So we'll see also men and women coming close to each other in terms of their physiognomy. This is also happening. And all these are new impulses in nature towards creating a unisex, not unisex in the sense of third sex, but a being which will be free of this. Does it mean there will be no relationship? There will be. But it will be the masculine type and the feminine type, not dependent on the physiognomy. One may be a man, but feminine predominantly. One may be a woman and masculine predominantly. All this is going to happen in the future, but we can see the first signs. वो कहते हैं ना, बच्चे का पाँव पालने में दिखता है. So the signs are emerging of cutting beyond the boundaries of physical gender towards something which will transcend gender, and yet the masculine and feminine, because they represent a truth of Ishvara and Shakti, it will remain. But it will be modified. So it will not be all this reproduction, menstrual cycle, and even physical sex, and all this will go away. In some, there will be a large section of humanity which is more closer to animal, which will need it. But there will be another humanity which will be lifted up towards a new creation. And in the transition, you will see these phenomena like even vanishing of menstrual cycle. By the way, a lot of now we see that actually very normally there are some people, or rather a number of women in whom the cycle ends very early, 40s. Puberty starts early. So all these changes are taking place. It's just a question of time. And as I said, in men, impotence taking over. So that forcibly nature is turning this energy. You have no choice but to turn it into higher and higher forms. But that's nature's game plan. We can do it very consciously. Turn this energy which goes into wanting a child, a baby, and a purely physical relation, turn it upward into something more sublime, something more beautiful. A love between a man and a woman which can be truly beautiful, very friendly, with a deep bond of intimacy, but without necessarily, this animal mode. A more human, a more divinized love. God-like love. So it's possible, and there are people who are like that. Yeah. This is a PhD level question, by the way. Looks very simple, though. Yes. Yes.
Two similar questions. How to deal with physical suffering, and how does one detach from physical pain and other generic physical and psychological suffering, which one inherits and it feels like a rock to hold?
Yeah, see, detachment from suffering is not a difficult thing, I must tell you. It's a question of practice. Right now, our consciousness is involved into something, but we need to just learn to step back. Now, how to do it is a very simple process. Let us say, when I am reading a book, I am fully absorbed into it. Now, suddenly, if my child comes, so the first tendency is don't disturb, right? But after some time, we realize, oh, it's my child, and you are attached to the child. So what you do, okay, beta, wait. So you keep the book and you engage with the child. So instead of using the word detaching from the physical, let's use the word attach ourselves to something which is, much vaster. So people, for instance, who are living in the mind, who are attached to thoughts and ideas, who play with ideas, very often they become oblivious of physical suffering. There are people who in jail have written wonderful books. I mean, even us, let's say at a very ordinary level, we are, taking a walk and we are living in a world of ideas or deep emotions. Have you seen that something happens physically and we don't get to know? Because we are now engaged in another world. But of course, if we are engaged in a world of emotions and thoughts, we are still vulnerable to suffering because it's still the circle of ignorance. So we take another level, that let us find a way to attach ourselves to that greater, deeper self. So instead of trying to detach and enter into a formless state, put this energy of attachment towards the greater, deeper self. So it can be, turning to the master, turning to the mantra, turning to a deity, it doesn't matter, or a state of consciousness. But if the more we do it, the more we'll begin to live in that state where, like Bulle Shah, we can say, तेरी तलवार के नीचे में नचियां करके थैया थैया. So, even though every drop of my blood is, you are wielding a sword and every, making bits and pieces, making keema out of me, but with every drop of blood I say, I am so much in delight, तेरी तलवार के नीचे में नचियां कह के थैया थैया. So, this is a possibility, but instead of trying to detach into something vague, attach. That, in fact, it's Bulle Shah's story that he went to a master to ask him that I want to understand spiritual life. What do I practice? How should I do it? So the master, he was, doing some farming thing, plucking out weeds or sowing seeds. So he kept asking and he would not do anything. So after a great, when he was pushed to a point, the master says, what is there so complicated? Athe chug, othe rak, Punjabi. Pick up from here, put it there. Pick up the concentration and attention from here and put it there. As simple as that. So now there, if we take it vague, formless, abstract, very difficult. So there are representations, images, mantras, forms, name and form, idea, all is the divine. This is an idea. The more we concentrate on this, the more it will happen, because the consciousness is now there. It is identified with the divine. And it can be so much identified that, as in the case of Raman Maharshi, and there are other yogis where operation was done without hypnosis. Completely could disengage. And I know in Sri Aurobindo Ashram, this, I think, was it Amal Kiran, whose eyes was operated and he completely went out of the body. He said, no need for anesthesia. Why? Because you right now consciousness is involved. See, the trick is to understand consciousness and phenomena, two sides of one reality. Let me put it like that. But for practical purposes, we should learn to separate. We think phenomena, consciousness is an epiphenomena. But no, phenomenal world is the expression of consciousness. That's what spiritual life is about. So consciousness is independent and primary. We can extract it out, put it elsewhere, and we experience it, isn't it? Depending on the mood we are, today morning we feel, wow, wonderful. Why? Because consciousness is identified with one thing. In the evening, the same wow, wonderful changes into glumpy and gloomy, because the consciousness is identified with another state. So our consciousness can identify with states, domains, levels, objects, persons, events, circumstances, and so on and so forth. So it's all a question of where we identify our consciousness with. In the beginning, habitually we get identified with the body, so that is called Deha Atma Bodh. But we can, by practice, identify it with thoughts or with the highest thought, because we have to start with something within this magic circle. So take the highest thought. Highest thought can be divine, Soham Asmi, Tattvamasi, Omkar, anything. Or a form, a deity. But when we start concentrating on that, slowly we are completely detached from this and we become identified with that. So this is the process. It's a reverse identification.
Is seeking yourself selfish when on the other side we can help others? Like, is a Jain Muni selfish to renunciate everything to find himself?
Yes, so first step is to find oneself. We can help only when we are free of the cage. Otherwise we'll be like birds all inside the cage and saying that, there is freedom out there. So we have, imagine sitting inside the jail and we are all wondering, this is not a good place. But we have heard, what? There is a sky. Oh, is it? Where have you heard? Oh, my scriptures tell me. No, scriptures don't help us become free. Scriptures are only to show us. They are indicative. They are needed. So then, if somebody has actually gone out and enters the jail, there are movies like that. That they plant a man who is a man of the CBI. He enters the jail. And he says, I am going to take you out because I know the way. So, you have to first discover your own freedom. Till we discover that, we cannot take the next step of helping and freeing others. But we can stop at our own freedom. It's given to man. But it will be a very selfish escape. So this we can choose. There are paths where one is free and says, I can't help it. People want to remain bound. Let them remain bound. This is one kind of thought. But somebody else may say, well, they are bound because they are bound by nature. It's not their fault. So let me extend myself into helping that ignorance. Both impulses are valid, and we all understand which is the greater impulse, to help everyone emerge out. But first we must emerge out. That should be the first focus. Even if we are helping, even though we have not yet fully emerged, the first stress should be that unless I come out, it may look selfish, but there is no other way. I mean, if I am a sick person, I can't help somebody. So I must discover the cure. I must be myself in a healthy state. Supposing a doctor goes around treating tuberculosis patient, and they say, Doctor Sahab, you are looking very lean, thin, you are appetite not. Why? What is the problem? And doctor says, I am very sick. And the patients will ask him that, what are you sick by? And the doctor says, I am suffering unfortunately from the same disease which you have called tuberculosis. So patient will say, Doctor Sahab, pehle apna ilaj kar lo. So, it's not selfishness, it is the first step to become free. But next step is to free everyone. Not just free, I said even go further. Transform this earthly life. Freedom is possible without transforming this earthly life. But then it makes an absurdity of this whole creation. Transform matter, still greater project. And we are here to do challenging things. Why should we, feel bad? We should be happy that we should take up challenges. What's there in life? The greater the challenge means the greater the grace. After all, not everybody is given a challenge. Only somebody like Arjuna is told to fight the great Kurukshetra battle. So, like that, yes.
So to procreate is nature's will and not the divine will.
Divine will can act directly or it can act through the veil of nature to procreate. No, you are saying. Okay. So now there is a lesser play of nature and there is a higher play. Higher play is supernature. A higher kind of nature of which right now we seek but we are not aware of. But there is an inferior play where we are learning. It's like a shadow game. Let me put it like that. Before somebody plays the real test match, one goes through training. So the inferior play of nature is created to train ourselves through all the ups and downs and disappointments and pleasures and pain for the real play. The real play has not yet started. So procreation is inferior play. Here also divine will is operating for the baby soul. An infant is given a toy. Kya toy? Have a bacha, offspring. Play with the offspring. But what is the real offspring? The birth of a new consciousness. Now you see, that's how it is. Now, in the inferior play, I'll remain what I am. I won't change. I have a child. Child will compel me to change. Little bit. Every child will compel the parents to change. You want to change? Bring a child. So, but a very difficult way to change. It'll bring patience, perseverance, tolerance, all the unconditional love, everything. Blah, blah, blah. So this is one inferior play. It's what is the child doing? Making you do yoga. You don't want to do yoga, you have a child. Child will make you do yoga. So he'll teach you patience, teach you perseverance, teach you equanimity. Night he will get up, pass urine. You can't say, I don't care. You will get up. He'll teach you what is true love. If your wife says that, I am having a pain, you'll say, you sleep, chup chap, pick up Disprin from the drawer. But when a child says, you don't say that. So this is the inferior play. But there is a higher play, a greater play, in which we can enter, which is the next step of our evolution. So procreation changes into new creation. The offspring, which was like a physical embodied being, can change into psychological offsprings, like with teachers. They talk about Manas Putra. And psychological offspring can change into spiritual offsprings, where the spiritual, a person endowed with spiritual energy or a divine soul can reproduce itself into numberless bodies. That's how the gurus and masters, they become parents, more than parents. So it just diverting that energy from the shadow play, the inferior game, to higher and higher modes of the same play. Yes, next one. Yeah.
What is new creation? In what all forms in matter will it manifest? Or has it already started manifesting?
Yes, what is new creation? To start with, it means a creation based on unity. It's a very good question. Right now, the creation based on division, and that is the root of all suffering. Me, this, that, all is separate. In new creation, there will be a continuous sense of unity. Like, if you take an example of modern physics, whether it is separate particles or whether there is one continuum wave. So, new creation is a state of unity. It is a state when every embodied being will experience vastness. He will no more be limited in this conception, that conception. So it's a state in which our mind will live automatically in a synthetic totality. The third aspect of this new creation is the emergence of new faculties. As I said, new way of knowing. Directly, it's an intuitive way of knowing, where even our morality will no more be confined within this framework. Already we see these trans-moral approaches which are coming up, but it will enter into a phase where we will decide, not society or religion or a textbook, what I should be. The sense of morality, ethics will spring up from the urge towards the beautiful and the true. And this is what we are seeing today, this shift towards a more intuitive, subjective way of knowing. Similarly, our hearts, our love, will no more be the old kind of division-based love where, we have cabins, compartment, but something which is much vaster. And of course, it will be based in matter. Similarly, our life, right now we have to struggle to achieve something. Now, when we live in a self-existent delight, then what will be the work of work? The work will be an expression of the delight of our being. It will be an extension of the joy within. All work will be play, and play the only work. If you want to put it a line from Savitri. Right now, work is a means for livelihood. Because through livelihood, we'll get some money, we'll have a comfortable life. But a person who has found the ease and peace and delight within, will he not work? He will work. But he'll work because there is within him the delight, the creative urge which must express in a certain way. And because he is contributing this energy to the world will sustain him. There will be whatever way money itself will change, lot of changes we'll see in the collective levels, but he will be sustained, but he'll not live for that sustenance. Because the work has become a means of expressing delight. Just imagine what a big shift. The body itself eventually will escape the law of degeneration and death, because right now the body itself lives in a state of self and not self. Take an example. In the initial few decades before air travel came up, people lived in a mohalla. If they went to a nearby village and came back, they would have diarrhea. Why? Because वो दूसरा गांव में गए थे, वहाँ का पानी पी लिया था. उनका घर का खाना अच्छा नहीं था. Then air travel started. Then people who would come all the way from America, first thing they would look for is Bisleri bottle. Now, because of this constant movement, the body is becoming more adapted and plastic to different kinds of food, different kinds of energy, even the fallout of all kinds of ozone layer, this, that, 100 impacts on the body. Till one day, the body itself will discover its own means, plasticity and wideness to absorb all these energies and transmute it. It will no more be dealing with it as a pathogen. I must fight. But it will deal with things which come from outside. It will know the law of oneness. So it will assimilate and transmute it. You know, there is a very interesting book written by an oncologist on this, which is called as Love, Miracle and Medicine. So, if possible, get hold of this book, where it says, even some of the lectures of Dr. Hegde, I haven't heard one or two, but very interesting concepts that treat the body, even the organisms, with compassion, with the energy of love, and change it. It's possible for love, but we don't have that energy of love. We have instead attachment. So that's why we give up. So this energy of love, when it begins to work on the body cells, on the mind, in our relationship with the world around, everything changes. We will not deal with environment the way we deal today. We will not deal with people around or animals the way we deal today. It is all an ego-based, desire-driven society, world we live in. But when there is love and not ego, and I mean love in the true sense, not human love in the ambit of the ego is something very different. But love in the true sense, it will create the sense of unity. We don't have to tell somebody, share your goodies with others. How do we do it with brothers? We don't have to think that, I must share it. There is a spontaneous impulse. Of course, brothers can also fight, but that's different. But similarly, when we live in the state of oneness and unity, many ills which we today want to correct, the ideal of brotherhood, unity, equality, all these dreams will be fulfilled. Because we'll experience delight inside, we will not suffer because of external situations, circumstances which are changing. We'll take delight in everything. We know that death doesn't exist. Even the challenge of disease will not, make us frightened and trembling. We can go through any situation and circumstance with the same delight, and this delight will help. It will also help in healing. When we look at a patient, we will not say, oh my God, miserable you are, sorry, but you have just few days. We'll say like Shaunak Rishi to Parikshit, what is death? It is nothing. Wake up to your true self, and because you have discovered it, it will have an impact. You can't say it from a rule book that, it is written in the Gita. It won't help. But when we live that consciousness and tell a patient, look, you are Sachidanand Brahm wearing a human mask, come, live in that state, it has an impact. So the whole life, and this is just the beginnings. Some of them I've already said about the man-woman relationship. It will change into just a mode of being. Even there will be a movement towards gender equality, equality at every level, which we see happening. Political systems will change into a divine anarchy and divine communism simultaneously. Right now we cannot conceive. where democracy and a benevolent sovereign, they will become one. And I can explain all this, but it'll be a whole seminar in its own right. But these are just hints. Money will change completely from something very physical to something which is more subtle. It will be like an exchange of energies. We are moving in that direction. So the future of the world will be a huge spiritual commune where we discover the one self in all beings. So, lot of beautiful things, wonderful things. Yes. Just the promo. This is just a little 2-minute trailer. Picture baki hai dost. Yes.
There are past memories which comes up to the surface and gives pain unwantedly from time to time. Then they subside. How to deal with them in the present?
Memories, they are very big problem. Memories, because of they pull us back to the level of attachment. So what do we do when past memories come up? There are two ways of dealing with it. One is we deal with them in the same way as we were, say 10 years back, there was a painful event. So if we are in the same state of consciousness, it will give pain. That means we have not progressed because of the pain. But if we progress, we can look upon the same thing. And then we will discover that my whole response, my whole reactions are reactions and responses of ignorance. And it can go to an extent where moment to moment we are free. The story of somebody who came and abused Buddha, and Buddha just smiled and he went away. Night he felt very bad because the whole memory came up. Next day he goes and says, Buddha, I am sorry. Buddha smiles and says, for what? He said, because I abused you. So he says, but you are not the same person. So you see, by a growth of consciousness, we can understand whatever happened in our life from a new standpoint. We can understand. I know of a lady who tells me on nearing 6 months before she died. She says, today I have forgiven my husband. Now she was separated more than 30 years back. So I said, this is good news. But what happened? She said, I realized the great truth of the Gita. Foreigner lady, Russian. But Russians are mystics. So she said, the Gita says, Yantra Runini Maya, we are all driven mechanically on a wheel. So I discovered today I have discovered, he was also bound to his nature, poor fellow, not his fault. So I said, thank you. See, she was waiting for me that, I have something precious to tell you. Because she had made a discovery. Now imagine it took her 30 years to complete a journey that, look, human beings are bound by their nature. So when we blame and complain, we are giving too much burden, importance to people. We don't need to give them so much importance that because of you I got hurt. Rather we should say, who are you to hurt me? I got hurt because I looked at an event in a certain way, but now I look at it very differently. In fact, I have compassion for you. That you could be like this. You too grow up. That would be the right response. And there could be many other responses. Somebody who has pained us, we can pray for that person. Because how much that person is suffering. When a snake bites you, he is living in a state of complete terror and fear. So you don't say, oh snake, I am angry with you, forever I will carry a grudge. You will tell a snake, look, your destiny is to be at the feet of Shiva. So people who hurt others are very miserable creatures, okay? So don't carry grudges. This is an illness called grudgitis. When memories come up, look at them from a new vantage point, from a higher and vaster. But naturally it cannot happen by intellectually saying. That's why practice widening, deepening, heightening of consciousness, so that when the time comes it can be applied. Otherwise, through a counseling session, this is the process. Start looking at things from a different standpoint. One last question maybe, because we have another session. Yeah.
Could you please shed some light on the process of matter being divinized?
Okay, this is a good question. With that we can end. The process of matter being divinized. I have already spoken about it. See, matter is what? It is a vehicle, a reservoir. It is a black box, a magic box. What all was not there within it? There was life within it and started to emerge. When mountains and rivers began to develop moss. Something was hidden inside that has come up. Then what was hidden inside life? Mind, it began to emerge. It's an interesting box. And what is more hidden inside? Spirit that has become to emerge. In people like, all of you and many other all over the world, there is an urge for something higher, something deeper. But when this begins to emerge, when life begins to emerge, does it discard matter? No, it uses matter, adapts matter to manifest life through matter. So matter begins to fly. What is this bird? It is a rock flying. We can say it and we'll be equally right. It is matter, isn't it? But something has been added to matter and matter has adapted to that. Matter has begun to reproduce. Matter has begun to run and crawl and fly. Similarly, what really is man thinking? We can say it is matter which has begun to think. But what has happened? Matter has adapted to the human consciousness and it has developed instruments so that thought can be processed. So similarly, the next step is the spiritual evolution. If we allow matter to hold this spiritual energy, and that's what is needed now in the next phase, that those who experience the divine consciousness or at least the higher states of consciousness should continue to live a material existence, not run away from this into forests, monasteries, etc. And then over a period of time, as this number of people will grow and matter will be compelled to adapt, it will develop centers within itself. What kind of change we are yet to, we can enter into a fantasy land. As much fantastic as, more fantastic than the gap between chimpanzee and human being. But surely the body at some point will begin to adapt as these states, higher states of consciousness, spiritual energy begins to stay in matter. It doesn't want to escape. So as a result, matter will undergo modification, the human cells will undergo modifications, and eventually a new organism, a new being with a new body. And Mother has spoken about it as a luminous body with spontaneous immunity, plasticity, capacity for bilocation, trilocation, all these things will come up. But this will be the essence. So there will be no disease, no degeneration, because the nature of spirit is no disease, no degeneration. So the bodily life will be like that. No disease, no degeneration. Forever youthful. Immortal literally, if you want to put it like that. Does it mean one will stay in the same body forever? No, one may want to leave it. But this will be a collective change. It cannot be an individual change. So, a certain number of individuals, what is called as the tipping point, have to reach that. Maybe after 300 years, 400 years, Mother spoke of that, when suddenly we'll see, because a certain number of individuals, like the first few chimpanzees declared odd by their fellows, suddenly found refuge in the feet of Rama, and changed into a super monkey. So similarly, some human beings who will suddenly not knowing what to do, they are different, suddenly take refuge in the divine and they change into superhumanity of tomorrow. Okay, so this is in nutshell. I am so sorry, I have another webinar in a few more minutes. Thank you so much. Thank you.